Okay, so now let's get to the part where I actually give you some practical tips on how to deal with nihilism and relativity. So if you're entering stage green, and stage green is deep, like I said before, you can go very deep on stage green. You enter very deep on stage green and you start to realize that everything is perspective. You don't know, is the left wing more right than the right wing? Is the right wing more right than the left wing? What kind of economy should we have? Are the socialists right? Are the capitalists right? Who's wrong? Who's right? You don't even know if Leo is right. You don't even know if actualize.org is right. Because if you're truly going through this nihilistic process, then you might say, well, okay, Leo says all this stuff, but he's just one guy. He could be deluded. He could be wrong. It could be just a partial perspective. What if Leo is no better than a fundamentalist Christian or Muslim? What if actualize.org is just another one of those things? What if it's whatever, a cult or whatever? You don't know. How could you know unless you have finished the process? So you're in this place, and then you also might think like, well, especially if you're young, like college age, you might be thinking like, well, what kind of career should I have? Should I be a writer? Should I be an artist? Should I be a business person? Should I pursue money? Should I pursue my passions? If I pursue my passions, where will I get my money? If I pursue my money, then I'll hate it and I won't have my passions. What kind of major should I major in? What should I do in university? Should I go to university? Should I go get a job? Should I go into the business world? Should I go onto Wall Street? Should I chase, stock investing in cryptocurrency? Should I build up a big nest egg and then go do my passion? Or should I do my passion now while I'm, penniless? What should I do? And then you're lost. So how do you handle this? I went through a lot of this in late high school and early college. Basically, your problem is that you need to find yourself. And you can't find yourself unless you lose yourself. And the reason most people don't find themselves is because they're too afraid of losing themselves and going deep into this nihilistic, relativistic process. The way that I handled it in my youth is I sort of came to this conclusion. I was stuck in this multi-perspectivalism and neutrality, non-judgment. But then I realized, okay, we have to make a distinction between absolute truth and relative truth. That's a distinction I made very early on in my teens. And I basically said that religion, science, these sorts of things, they're not absolutely true, but they might have relative truths to them. And even though it might not be absolutely true that, for example, right-wing talk radio conservatives are more wrong than, or right, whichever, than liberals and progressives. So like maybe I can't adjudicate this conflict of ideology and politics at the level of the absolute truth, but I can look at it at the level of relative truth. For example, I can just look at what will make for a better society. Like, for example, I could ask myself the question when it comes to liberals and conservatives, I can ask the question of like, well, who should I vote for? Should I vote for Republican or Democrat? Well, in the absolute sense, from absolute perspective, you could say it doesn't matter and I can't know. But from the relative perspective, I can say like, do I care about the environment? Do I want a cleaner, healthier environment? If I do, then I should vote for liberals rather than conservatives because conservatives don't give a fuck. Do I think that there's a problem in our society if the middle class is shrinking from both sides and we have this gap between the very poor and the very rich at the top, and that's growing over time? Is that going to lead to a society I want to live in that I will enjoy? And my answer is no. Well, which party cares about that? The liberals. The conservatives don't give a fuck. And so this, you're thinking more from a survival perspective. And so basically, what I realize is that from the absolute perspective, I don't really know the truth. But from the relative perspective, I still have preferences. Like there's things I want out of life. I want to live a passionate life. That's something I knew I wanted. Not because it's absolutely true. Not because some God is forcing me to. Not because I'm going to go to hell if I don't. Not because I'm going to go to heaven in an afterlife. Not because science says so, but simply because I want a passionate life. And that in and of itself is valid. It's its own valid thing. And also another point that I made, this is very important lesson from this, going through this nihilism, is that you learn, what it teaches you is you learn not to rationalize and justify your preferences and biases in terms of objective truths or normative statements. So what I mean by that is that usually when an ordinary human is pursuing something in their life, they're going to try to ground it in some absolute truth or norm. They're going to try to make it objective. They're going to rationalize it in their mind. So like if they're pursuing a family, rather than just saying, you know what, I'm just selfish and I just want to have a family. I want to, I like playing with kids. I think I'll enjoy that. I like having a wife. I like the companionship of it. I'll just enjoy that. And I'm just doing it for selfish purposes. See, instead of being honest and admitting that to yourself, what most people do, traditional people, is to say, oh, well, a family, this is good for society. God wants me to have a family. And, we really need this family to maintain our civilization. So they come up with all these fucking rationalizations. When really, you just want to be honest with yourself about your biases. You can have biases and preferences, just admit them to yourself. You might say, well, Leo, that makes no difference. It actually makes a very big difference. Because when you admit to yourself that what you're pursuing in life is nothing other than your own selfishness and biases and preferences, and you don't try to ground it in genetics or biology or some sort of story about how, well, I'm going to go in business and I'm going to compete against that business because it's survival of the fittest, and you have this whole story about how actually it's the fittest who survive, the fittest deserve to win, and this and that. No, just tell yourself you're a selfish fuck and you want money for sex. Tell yourself that. That would be more honest than coming up with some sort of, survival of the fittest and perpetuating the species. And this it's fucking ridiculous. The reality is you're horny and you want sex. It has nothing to do with evolution from your perspective. And if you if you're going to be a Christian, but then say to yourself, I'm not a Christian because being a Christian is the absolute truth. I'm a Christian because I was born in a particular part of the world where Christianity was popular. I was indoctrinated with it. I have these preferences now. I'm stuck with them. And I'm going to go with it. This is my preference. It's purely arbitrary. It's not about truth. It's not about the Bible. This is just purely arbitrary. I prefer these things over, let's say, Hinduism. And so I'm going to do that because I prefer it. I enjoy it. I enjoy the Christian God more than I enjoy the Hindu gods. Why? Just because I'm selfish and I'm biased. And that's what I grew up in. See, if you admit that, that would be truthful. And then you wouldn't have to play these defensive games anymore. And you would have freedom from ideology. Likewise with science. Admit to yourself that science is just something you were culturally conditioned into, and that you have a preference for it, but that it's not the best, it's not the truest. There could be important truths in Christianity that you haven't been taught in science and so forth, and then you'll have a much healthier attitude towards science.